I'm going to keep rolling with it. Boy, oh boy, oh, Albert. Boy, oh boy, oh, ah. So the Boyos are going to Isengard.
I'm just going to join in with you there.
No,
I'm quite sure
I have a place for you. I have a place for you. Oh, we did it too soon. All right. The Boyos are going to Isengard to meet the great wizard. The great English wizard standing in Isengard, but they haven't realized that he has turned evil. And they arrive in and they say, "Hello, James."
Is that it? Is that the story?
That's the setup. What are you going to do with that evil English wizard? What are you going to do with that?
Well, I'll probably kill them then, wouldn't I? Just go on their big adventure. They turn up. Hello, James. Well, bang. I'm evil. Bang.
Just throw them down into those mines in Isengard and be like, "You fucking idiots! Why did you come here?" Like, I was evil, yeah. But luckily, I don't know. We had Gandalf, so he saved us. He told us never to trust the English, so we all ran away from them. Didn't know. How are you, James? It's been a while.
Your stories make absolutely zero sense as well. Never trust the English. Why are you coming to me in the first place if you know I'm evil as well?
But see, we were all naive hobbits, like Boyos. You know, we thought that we grew up in the Shire and everything was beautiful. And strangely, we all had English accents. Well, what do you make about that? I don't know.
True.
But we didn't really understand the complexities, the danger of the world, the danger of the eternal Anglo. And so we dilly-dallied off. You know that scene in Lord of the Rings where that guy, the black guys on the horse, the big black drape dudes with the big swords. That's sort of like we thought they were some evil spirits, but it turns out they were just actually Englishmen. That's all they were. And then we went there, and then Gandalf had to tell us, be like, dudes, don't go to Great James, the degenerate wizard. Be careful.
Well, I'll tell you what I should do. I want to see an alternate take of the Lord of the Rings where Saruman, he just takes all the potatoes out of the Shire.
Oh, you evil bastard.
They don't even think they get out of the Shire. They're just like, what can I do? I'm fucked. The English have done it again. It's always the potatoes.
Oh, that was a pretty good joke. I got to give it to you, you bastard. Oh my God.
Thank you.
And so does that mean Mordor is Buckingham Palace then? Yeah.
Yeah, basically.
And Gondor can Rohan be the French then? Is that what it is?
Yeah, as long as they're less powerful than whatever the mountain was called, which I think is true, isn't it? They sort of got a bit fucked in the very, very beginning. It was like a few thousand years beforehand. The English kind of wiped them all out, and they never got over it.
Who's the, what are we talking about now? Wait, what are we talking? Who did the English wipe out? I know they had a habit of doing this, but who did they wipe out? I guess I've lost count of all the times I've heard this happen.
Oh, the English have wiped out the French many, many, many times. Everything you see in the history books that has the French winning. I think it's a really funny Google joke. Type in French militia victories, and the search comes up with, "Did you mean French militia defeats?" And it's like, that is exactly right. Exactly spot on.
Do you know, I've looked at something and I've discovered, I think you'll really like this, that the nation that has won the most battles in history was actually France. They're the most adept conquerors. It's funny we call them surrender monkeys, but they were like the biggest badasses on earth in history ever.
Is this just around Napoleon?
No, I think because the French Empire was just like a beast for probably the majority of Europe. It was like the most royal part of Europe till the French Revolution. That changed quite a lot. I think Napoleon was the end of that dominance, but up until then it was like they were just conquering all sides. They were winning against everybody. So
yeah, but then we had our empire, and so you could probably say that in total, all the places that we came to, we win at the end of the day.
But France like owned a load as well. They owned like most of Africa, and they owned Africa was like England, France, and Italy, wasn't it? And then French Canada. You know, they had quite a large part of America as well. So
and Spain was a big part of that as well. But we used to go around raiding Spanish ships for personal amusement, literally for personal amusement. And they didn't really fight back. By the way, I like the name of your presentation, Man and His Boyos.
I forgot you'd be able to see that, yeah.
Yeah, and I can see some of the pictures down the side. It's going to be autistic beyond fucking belief.
Okay, let's get into it, because people are probably going to tune into this and they're like, well, what are these guys talking about Jung for? They've just been bringing up like what is a boyo, and they've been bringing up like Isengard and all this stuff. Gentlemen, ladies and boyo men, we are here to discuss Man and his symbols. Many people have asked us, where should we begin if we are to get into Carl Jung? Where should we start? What's the first place we should go to? And this would be the book I would say everybody should begin with. Why? Because Carl Jung decided he wanted to chew up all his crazy theories and put them in
What
a...
are you going to say then? Carl Jung decided he was going to what?
Chew up? Did you not
No,
hear?
you weren't. You were going to say something else then. What were you saying?
I don't know. It definitely wasn't... All right, I'm going to nut in a book, and then that's going to give it out. There you go, people. Our credibility is gone now.
It's so funny because this was the last thing he did before he died. He did it 10 days before he got his final illness. You could say, what's my last mark I'm going to leave on humanity?
Well, there you go.
He was into the pages and closes it.
He left not only his information but also his genetic information. So he tried to, like, you know, cover both angles there. Was this the just before he died? That's crazy. I didn't know.
Yeah, he had a final illness, I think, in 1961, and he finished his section of the book, I think, 10 days before he got his illness. Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. Well, see, there you go, people. Like the alpha and omega, the place to start is at the end. And he did actually genuinely write this as to be a simple introduction into his work. And so a lot of people ask me where to start with Jung, like what books to start with, and also what to do, like what is Jung trying to imply. And I'm definitely going to talk about that towards the end. But the main thing he brings up is the idea of this is the basics, this is the foundation, and once you roll with this will show you the way, if you will. So it's the simple stuff, it's the basics, and as any elite athlete will tell you, you should practice the basics over and over again and get to know them well. So I'm going to go on a little adventure here with James, my commentator. James.
Yes.
So do you remember, like, back in the day, back when we were like ancients, you know, when we used to rip off the skin of animals and wear them around our waist, like these little, like, dresses?
I remember it well. Also, maybe you should make this full screen so it's actually semi-decent production value.
Is it not full screen, though?
No.
We should probably, like, how?
File, edit, view, insert.
Oh, yes, right. Yeah. Okay, yeah, no, that's good. It's good right there. Full screen, present. Sorry there, people, having a few technical difficulties. There you go.
There you go.
That's
beautiful. But yes, you were talking about sort of wearing deceased animals as clothing.
Yeah, so back when we used to dress up in that sense, we used to live in nature. We used to be a lot more connected with nature, and that there, people, is the important motif I want to bring up. Back in the days when we used to roam the planet and see rivers and feel them, you know, we used to hear the sounds. Instead, today we live in cities, and you hear all the cars going around. The only water sounds you really hear, and I noticed this one night, is when you're outside, it's like all the cars rushing. It sounds like an ocean in some sense. This strange industrial ocean, because all the cars kind of moaning in the distance and whatnot. But instead, these people, old Grug here, he had the beautiful rising sun, which if you live in a city, you probably haven't seen in years, and the beautiful rivers and all that. So this is what reality was. This is what reality is. And you would wander around, and your understanding of reality, there's no distinction between you and your world. What's very interesting is Jung says in one of his later books as well that the path towards individuation begins with integrating your mind and your emotions, and then it becomes your whole inner world and yourself, I think. And then lastly, it becomes the entire world around you and you. There's this unity you achieve at the end. And these people who lived in nature had this unity in place. Their religions were a testament to this. And so they built many monuments that represented that. They built many monuments that represented their understanding of their unity with nature and whatnot. This one, in fact, is, would you believe, in all places in England.
It was.
Yeah. And so in order for them to understand the world, they did a very, very human thing, which is they projected their ideas about the world onto the world as people, because we're social animals. Our brain is very much wired to shape the world into a sort of social understanding of what it is. And so many concepts, powers, gods, forces, whatever you want to call them, we represented them to ourselves as figures. And these things became the foundation of our religion. These became our symbols, with which we understand the world. So the way we talk about things like truth now, this is very interesting. If you say the word truth, it's an abstraction, and it's actually quite an empty abstraction in our rational worlds, in our city-baked minds. I say truth, And me and James say, yeah, that's great and all that. But for example, the Romans, if you said truth, you would call it veritas. And veritas was a concept represented as a person. And so they believed it as almost like a living being, a spirit in some sense. And all their gods had this representation to it. And hey, look, this could mean that gods do exist as a metaphysical thing as well, but this is a very interesting way to look at this stuff, to look at these things like veritas as symbols for unbelievably deep ideas. Like, how deep is the idea of truth? You can't really capture it with like that little mouth sound, truth. Like, that doesn't really do it justice. But maybe the image of a woman who rewards you with who rewards you with the status of a real man if you obey her, if you worship her. Maybe that captures it a little bit better, and that's the way the Romans did it. And of course, the Egyptians and everybody else had a good one as well. And so we continue this journey, and we look at our temples, we look at the Greeks, we look all around us about the way we created the modern world, what we were a part of. And then since we've lost this, something very, very strange is starting to happen. Our connection with the world has severed. Our connection with nature has severed. And we are now trying to re-find ourselves back into nature, I believe, if I was to say anything, because we became reasonable, because we became highly rational, because we became over-civilized. We lost that connection. And so all those symbols sort of died, the death of the gods, if you will. And then we found ourselves in this really weird situation where we were wandering around industrial world. And England was actually one of the main places that started. And then nowadays, I think if you look around, Nietzsche noticed this. Nietzsche said that even though he sees religion dying in Europe, he believes religiousness was actually increasing. People were becoming more devotional. Only this time they were projecting their devotion, their religious feelings onto things that they can't really see, abstractions, ideologies, as some people say. People call them ideologues when they're infected with like this belief that it has to be communism, it has to be capitalism, it has to be fascism, it has to be whatever your belief is, that they would say that you're almost like possessed by, quote unquote, like a new god or some sort. So Nietzsche noticed that religiousness. And then we see people nowadays still driving, trying to bring us back in touch with nature, trying to have this relationship with nature again. And some people suggest that we should start worshiping the environment like Mother Nature. Other people suggest that we should discard the environment and try move towards this super civilized technical civilization. Some people say that we should start eating bugs to stop hurting the animals. And so all these things become very, very interesting. How much of this behavior has this unconscious religious undercurrent, and how much could be solved if we could reconnect ourselves with our super deep minds? So James, if we were to ask what is the best Carl Jung book to start with, and I suggest this one, and I suggest this problem is the main thing that I see in this book, what would you think?
I would agree with you. This book was written to be the book for the layman. And there's actually an interesting story with that. He talks about in the foreword where someone from the BBC, I think, came up to Jung and said, "Hey, buddy, you're about to die soon. Can you please get your details, your information, your works out to members of the public?" And he said, "No." And so the guy was really upset. And then Jung had a dream very soon after that where he was standing on stage talking to a whole bunch of different people that weren't doctors and that weren't people who were obsessed with nomenclature, really heady intellectual people. And so he took that as a sign of the unconscious telling him, we'll get into dreams, I'm sure, the unconscious telling him, "No, maybe you haven't made a particularly great choice there. Maybe you should balance this out." And he was like, "Oh, okay, unconscious. Okay, dreams. I'll listen to you." And so he thought that was his new mission, to go and create something that the average person could understand. So yes, this is definitely the best Carl Jung book to start with. You can jump in at the deep end if you want to. There are a few other texts you can do, but they will probably scare you off. And yeah, and the whole idea with reconnecting to nature and reconnecting to the environment, it's an interesting way to phrase it, and I think you're correct. But built in with that is an image, at least in my mind, perhaps you've got the same thing, of somebody renouncing civilization and going out barefoot into the forest and going, "I love Mother Nature and Mother Europa," and all that stuff. That's not exactly what Jung's talking about. What he means is there's almost a psychological law that we've evolved to have in our brains, which is a harmony between our instincts, essentially, and our emotions, and the way they've adapted to the world around us. In order to be happy people, we can't just throw all that stuff away. We can't be super rational, conscious people. And also, because we live in the modern world, we can't go back barefoot into the forest again. You miss out on the spoils. So what he's talking about is trying to get a balance between conscious and unconscious so that you can be happy. not be led by what other people tell you to do, not be led by these other ideas imposed on you, but to look within yourself and figure out what is it that's actually going to make you happy.
Yes, and another frame I'd like to add to that, to just complement what Jimothy has said over there, is that when we say we had that connection with nature, Jung, and he'll get into this throughout the thing, is that in the past there would have been no distinction between me, my soul, and the outside world. It was almost like people harmonized their souls. So when someone saw an animal fighting, they would see anger in it, and they would like sort of recognize the anger in themselves, and they would say, okay, God, the God of anger is in our presence right now. Like it's a very weird way of thinking for us, because we would just point at the animal, you're like, oh look, the animal's angry. There would be no notion that we're in the presence of a concept, you know. Like if someone says the truth, you don't go, oh, we're in the presence of truth is here. But that's sort of, it makes sense in a weird way. But obviously we can't do that in civilized society, because we've evolved past that, if you will. Perhaps we've evolved away from that. Maybe that's the correct way to phrase that. But what we still have, to complement what James is saying, is despite the fact that we don't really have nature around us, or we don't interact with nature the way that, I guess we just don't interact with nature in that old way, we still have a nature in us. We still have our human nature. So Jung proposes that, yes, we have a nature, and it's always in us. And if you want to reconnect with something, if you want to, I guess you say, grow your roots down into something to make sure your head doesn't spiral off into like nonce land, what you need to do is root it into the human nature. And he says in order to do that, you must go to where human nature is, and human nature is stored in the unconscious. And now you start to see why Jung was such a crazy, crazy man who knew some very interesting things. So let's keep going.
Yeah. It's also important, I guess, to just, I guess, a final bit to add on the end there, that Jung was also a clinician as well. So he was very much concerned with health. So the frame that we're putting here isn't necessarily an abstract philosophical thing of, this is the way things should be. Jung was approaching it very pragmatically and going, if you want to be healthy, these are the laws that you have to follow. And there is an interesting way you can look at this too from evolutionary science, which is probably the best way to do it for the modern intellect and sensibilities, where more quote unquote primitive human beings, they did have a less evolved consciousness. And by that, I mean their consciousness and their psyche was adapted for their world and their environment. So like they would see spirits all the time, and they would talk to rocks, and they would talk to trees. But for whatever reason, over evolutionary history, we've adapted to a newer environment. So as you were saying, Stefan, you can't necessarily go back to that particular frame very easily because we have a different toolkit. But if you keep in mind the idea of health, which is also what Nietzsche had in his philosophy, you can find seeds of it all over Jung. If you just keep health in mind and what you want to be happy, then what Jung says to do in this book is of huge, huge value to everybody who reads it.
Mm-hmm. Most certainly. Yes, most certainly. So excellent job, James. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you kindly.
Yes, constable quality right there, sir. Constable quality.
I don't know why constable is specifically English. I think all nations have a police force, although we have the strongest police force. Keep everybody in line, especially those pesky little potato boys.
I think I gotta go to the bathroom now. Like, oh no, yeah, coming back. I think constable just sounds very English. Like you wouldn't hear. I don't know. It just sounds very English to me. Constable, yes. Quiet, yes. Jolly good. Go arrest them, sir. Those rascals, yes.
Yeah, and it's funny as well because we don't have guns or very few guns on policemen, so they do sort of PC plod running around. I don't want to insult the police force at all because they do a wonderful job, but it is funny. You got sort of like criminals with guns. It's like, oh no, jolly good sir, come here, drop to your knees, please, in the name of Her Majesty. It's not.
Oi mate, you got a license for that, mate? You got a license for that go-kart, mate? You got a license for that bicycle, mate? Yeah.
But that would be what Grog was saying earlier, because Grog is basically a Northman.
You got a license to venture into the unconscious? Oh, that's such a nerd joke. Oh my god. Okay, into the book, people. Sorry, tangents and nonsense keep happening. And so he begins the book by talking about symbols. And someone actually asked me in the comments. So here you go. Here's a response, not only from me, but from Carl fucking Jung, man. The big cheese. The big cheese wrote down this for you, motherfucker. So people ask about symbols, and Jung does a distinction between signs and symbols, because symbols are weird. Like when someone says symbol, you're like, yeah, like, McDonald's or whatever. Like, I see the McDonald's arches, or James there with his Diet Coke. Like these things all have sort of an energy to them. It's weird, but like, how is that any different from something like UNICEF that you see here? Or something that describes what something is. So UNICEF is this sort of idea, this organization. It's very, very descriptive. It gives you this way of understanding what that thing is. But then you have beside it a symbol, which is what we're going to focus on here a lot more. And it's of this kind of circle with like a woman and a child, for example. And inside this symbol is, well, I guess you could say there's an idea in it. Like the circle could represent the earth in some sense. And the whole idea you'll notice that's going on in the modern world is us figuring out how to deal with globalization. And actually what's going underneath that is there's a desire among people. There's a sort of massive consent among everybody that we should globalize the world. And I talk about the kingdom, I'm sure you've heard before, where people have this idea of how the world should be. They utopianize the world, and everybody does it. Doesn't matter which direction you are. Like Christians utopianize, they believe in their kingdom, and people who are into globalization believe in their kingdom. And if you're Alex Jones, you might be like, they're all globalists or whatever. But nonetheless, they have this desire to see the world unified in that type of sense. They have a will towards that kingdom. This is the way I'd like the world to be. And that's such a complex idea. There's so much inside of that it's difficult to pack it into, just a word. It's difficult that, like, it needs paragraphs. I'm not even sure it can be stored in paragraphs, because the idea of unifying the whole world involves so many variables. It involves changing everything so radically that you can't really describe it until it's done. So all you really have is this like glistening desire. And this desire is to see, I guess you could say, unified equality triumph in the end. And you can see how religious that idea is. It's unbelievably religious. It's like the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's like, okay, finally we will make this kingdom, this dream that we had from like all of our religions about one world based on love, and this universal love law and this universal religion will finally make it come down here. And so this desire, it's so potent. It's almost instinctual. I guess it is instinctual. You need to pack it into something. So you pack it into such a symbol. And you'll see symbols like this pop up in many institutions that talk about it. I believe the UN is something similar as well. And so you can see how a symbol is different. It's almost charged. It's got an energy to it in some sense. And we're not even sure if this stuff is conscious, because what that whole globalized world could mean, like you could write paragraphs about it, but people aren't really aware fully of how that would feel, what it would be like. It's a dream in the future. And so it's very, very complex. And so we need to use something like a symbol in order to describe it. Mm-hmm. And so when you look in the past at symbols, you will see, for example, the Norse runes. They would do a very, very similar thing with their writing. The way that we understand writing nowadays is sort of like signs or tools to, I don't know, blah, 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 blather on, if you will. But the way that the alphabets tended to be created, structured, was each single letter was a symbol of something. And so you get like stuff like magic and all this. People believed in magic because they believed that each of these symbols with this energy, whenever you're using that word, you were, charging the reality. And this is where you get magic has that idea of like grimoire, that's grammar, and to cast the spell. Like, what is that more than to spell a fucking word? Like, it's the same thing. And so a great example of this is the Norse runes. Like, each of these represents a sort of a phenomenon in nature, but it also represents a god, because the way they thought, and it represents a time of like, a season and stuff like this. Like, it's all packed into these things. And so they're very, very numinous. They shine. They're charged with a lot of energy and ideas. And they had this way of organizing people's minds, and people would use them in divination for that reason. They would like shake them up and then pull one out and be like, all right, this is what's going on. And Jung was really into the I Ching, which does something very, very similar. And so Jung brings up a very, very poignant example at the very, very start about how deep this, I guess you could say, world of symbols runs inside of us, and how much they influence our mind. He talks about a man who came over to England, of all places. And he saw in a Christian church the four animal heads. And he was sort of like, what's going on here? I think he was Indian, so he probably didn't have any churches that were so symbolized, because they were probably more modern Protestant churches that didn't really like this stuff. And so he comes in and he's like, what the hell is this, like pagan stuff? Like, what's going on here? But what he doesn't realize is that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John of course, are represented as these symbols. And the reason why they're represented at these symbols actually stems to an older part of the Bible called Ezekiel, where Ezekiel, this is this bottom part down here, Ezekiel sees these four animals come up, and it's like a representation of perfect order and, like, you know, the four corners of the world and all this. And we've talked in previous Ion lectures about how Jung sees the quaternity as a core way of us instilling order onto the world, like the way we do 4 seasons, 4 main parts of the clock, and that type of idea. So 4 is a big deal. And it manifests from, like, when Ezekiel's having this very profound vision where he's interacting with God, 4 appears, and it's as these 4 animals, and it goes even deeper. It goes all the way back to ancient Egypt as well, the same 4 animals, that type of thing. And you'll see this like all over the place. And so what's interesting about this is because it shows that this symbol seems to be there stably for thousands of years, perhaps even as long as humans have existed, almost as if it's in the unconscious, as if it's some type of foundational idea. And what happens is that we keep rediscovering it. Ezekiel discovers it. And so the Egyptians discover it. Ezekiel rediscovers it. And then Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Christians, rediscover it again. And then this Indian man suddenly rediscovers it once more. And so for some reason, we've decided that this symbol is valuable. It's got something to tell us. Just like the global world thing has this charge in it. What charge is inside this? What charge does the 4 pillars of order mean to people? And this does suggest that, and this is the weirdest thing about it, these symbols are far older than we are. Like when this Indian man dies, he'll go away, but these symbols will again reappear in 50 years to someone else. They'll always be there, and they always have been there, almost as if they live somewhere, you could say, indestructible, like, I don't know, heaven or something like that. And Jung called this the unconscious, I guess you could say, the collective unconscious, outside of our reality. And this is a really important thing to understand, because when you are diving into this place, in some sense, you start interacting with this stuff, and they become serious questions. What are these things, and why are they always there? Any thoughts, Jimmy?
Yeah, an interesting way to conceptualize the idea of a collective unconscious, because I know that it can be quite confusing. Imagine that we all went and colonized Mars, like Elon Musk, for some very strange reason, wants to go and do. And you have like the people who first moved to Mars, and then you got their descendants, and they've never been to Earth before. They've never seen animals before. But the idea would be, if it's correct, then their dreams would bring these symbols up, despite never seeing them in real life. And so it's the same thing. And if they might not have seen places on Earth like a walled city, but that's also a motif that's existed for a very long time in human history. So they'd also dream of those things, and they'd be like, what the hell is all this stuff? I don't know what they mean. So yeah, the idea is for some reason, and there will be a reason, because things in evolution don't really happen as accidents. That's not technically true. You can have things like losing function over time, but generally things don't happen for an accident. For some reason, they became memes, and they became stabilizing memes, and so they have some kind of deeper purpose, and they exist within our collective unconscious. So the question then remains, what is the purpose of these things?
And this is where it becomes related to what we were saying earlier. Like the example I use here is the idea of romance and the power of the lover. Like the unity of man and woman is, like, you'll call it archetypal, because it is probably the most fundamental thing most people are going to go through in their life, unless they're going to have like an exceptional bit of participation in history. Generally speaking, your love is a big deal, because that's how you're going to get children. That's how you're going to leave your legacy and all that. And so the lovers, that idea is just so unbelievably permanent. Everybody knows about it. And even when you're kids, it's not a factor, but once you all start hitting puberty, you stop suddenly being friends with the girls, and you start seeing girls in a different way and all that. And it goes to show that it's this sort of unconscious thing. And then when the time is right, it will rise to consciousness, and it will like sort of take you. It's not like you decide as a kid. It's like, oh, it's time I started to, spread my seed a bit. Yes, jolly good. Like it is a lot more about
The English don't spread their seed, though. They're all sexually inert until they die. That's how they built the great empire.
That's true. They reproduce via cabbages, I believe, isn't it?
Yes.
Storks. Yes. Yeah, they're very in touch with nature in that way. They're like, master the power of the cabbage and the stork.
So yes, very deep, very profound.
Yes, and so you can see this idea of this stuff popping out, and what it could suggest, and I think what Jung is suggesting is that these symbols are almost like the coding, the the computer code of our nature, of our human nature. And so if you've lost touch with the world, with nature, if you live in a rationalized, civilized world, you can still get back in touch with something that is ancient and natural and powerful. What is nature? Only something outside of us that lives and has power and has its own life in some sense. You can actually achieve that through finding these symbols which seem to have their own life, their own desire. The way love pulls us together is incomprehensibly profound, and it always does. It's like this ever-present force. And your relationship to love, it's going to be so fundamental to your life, because if you have a bad relationship to it, you'll probably be quite lonely, you know? So you need to sort out your relationship with these symbols. You need to sort out, I guess, your relationship with this destiny.
Yeah, so like when you're a man who's growing up, you'll get horny at some point, and you will want to spread your seed. But we know that that's a thing because we feel it. And I think these ideas are quite confusing to people, and they seem quite new age and woo woo because modern people don't really pay attention to things that they're not taught to pay attention to. You can't get away from your sexual instinct. And you also can't get away from symbols that appear in your dreams and your unconscious resonance with symbols, but they're there just like an instinct to try and direct you in a particular direction, which is very, very scary. It means there's a lot more, you could say, talking to you than you actually realize. And it could be of very, very good use to you.
Yes, yes. And Jung then starts talking about how tribal people are more able to give themselves over to this. Now, he does warn that tribal people tend to have way less autonomy, where they can decide if they're going to get taken over by something or not. They tend to give themselves over more readily, which is a benefit in some sense, but that can also be very, very dangerous, because then, for example, if they decide, oh, we got to sacrifice JIMI there for being the evil wizard in Isengard, then they'll all like do a dance and then they'll like tear him apart with whips or something like that. You're like, whoa, that was unbelievably savage, but it will come out in that way.
That happened
Then,
to Captain Cook, by the way. I was reading about his death recently. Anyway, he went to an island to wherever the natives were, and he was like waving at them or something, walking up the shore towards them. So they ripped him to pieces and ate him.
Because I guess that's
his crew had to like salvage some of the bones and take them home.
Jesus Christ Almighty!
Yeah.
See, I guess that's what it is that like, you know, maybe did the wave like trigger something? Is that what the evil god does or something like that? You don't really know. And maybe that's what happened. He like waves, and they're like, oh, all the prophecies say the man who waves shall be eaten. So they're like, sweet, lunchtime. Like, it's really hard to know, and they kind of all just get that instinct. It triggers. It's a symbol that triggers something in them. Like, it's hard to know this stuff.
Yes.
But I'm going to use a little example from myself about how it happened to me, because the opposite is that we become really in our heads and we try to think everything through, you know, and that's actually, like, you'd imagine that's the right thing to do, but no, that's just the opposite end of I guess you could say unconscious, you know what I mean? Like, or maybe too conscious. You're kind of like stiff and you have no connection. Ideally, you want to blend these two things together. So you become like too in your head, too stiff, and that causes all this like problems, because then, for example, you become really in your head and you think, all right, nobody's good enough for me, or I want the perfect person and all this stuff. And then this starts to pathologize your ability to experience love. And that becomes very, very interesting, because maybe if you started to, I don't know, stop looking for the perfect person and start just paying attention to the people in front of you, you'd find something very perfect and human in them. You'll find maybe you don't want the perfect thing as much as you think it was. And so there's something very interesting about that. And then, for example, the way I let my tribal thing out was one time I was going to a Jack White festival, and I would have been, you know, college boy. So I wouldn't have been like a rock star. I wouldn't have had the abundant lifestyle of drinking all the time. But I did love like kind of letting loose and whatnot. And so for this festival, I dressed up as Slash from Guns N' Roses and got absolutely destroyed, hammered. I completely black out. I don't even like remember what happened and all this. But it was very funny that usually I would drink, but usually I wouldn't drink that much. But then because I was going to this because I was dressed as Slash, I kept on saying to myself, I need to keep drinking. I need to drink more, because I was like personifying, like, I guess you could say Dionysus in his like purest form, if you know what I mean. And it was a little bit pathologized because I was giving myself over to it. And I just kept on getting more and more and more and more and more and more and more hammered. And it makes for a great story. But when I think back to that night, like, I didn't have a good night at all because I don't remember anything. It could have been great. It could have been terrible. I just don't remember it all. And yeah, I've always found that interesting.
Yeah, what you're describing, I think, is a more extreme and funny version of basically every night out ever. Because it is strange. Like, you think alcohol as a drug, people would just enjoy consuming it, of course, because it makes you feel nice. But what most people tend to do is go listen to music. They'll go to a club, or they'll go to a band, or they'll play loud music somewhere. And if you think about what Dionysus was, that's exactly what Dionysus was.
Yeah.
It's that enraptured letting go feeling, like music and wine, basically. So you are allowing a spirit to take over you and possess you. And I got this from Nietzsche, and I think it's so intelligent that why is it called spirits, the drink? You know, is that an accident that it was called that?
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Intelligent.
And spirit is related to inspiration as well, which is interesting in and of itself. And this is probably the best one. When you drink alcohol, like, for example, if you take LSD, what's going to happen is your brain is going to get stimulated in all these spaces, and probably it'll like open up it will interconnect part of your brains that have never talked to each other before. And you'll start seeing, like, you know, degenerate JIMIs all over the room, like falling out of the walls and stuff like that. And like, just like, I don't know, changing your curtains in a very, very weird way, like stuff like that.
Changing the color and the consistency.
I forgot what I was going to say.
I become a degenerate internal decorator.
I forgot what I was going to say. What was I going to say? Yes. Okay. So LSD will spark up and like create, give Jimmy a new job. Let's put it that way. But then but if you take alcohol, what alcohol does is almost entirely your prefrontal cortex. Like, it attacks the most rational part of yourself. It turns off the higher cognitive aware functions. It takes you out of your head by default. And it's interesting that Dionysus shows up specifically when you start seeing cultures that are very civilized, like Greece. And then from there, it kind of grows into Bacchus for the Romans and all that. And it is that energy trying to serve itself, where it's trying to pull you out of your head. It's trying to, and like, it's the god of the wine, because that's what wine does. Wine is like this thing that kills, like, turns off that part of your head, because that's something you're not able to do yourself, and it allows you to be something which you're not usually, but it's still a part of you that you want to be. You want to surrender to life in some sense. You want to just give into the moment. You want to go crazy. You want to be a little bit more like an animal. And like, this is coming from an Irish man. Like, this is the most spiritual stuff we'll ever discuss. Like, to be Irish is to be, like, you know, sort of stiff, sarcastic, like, indirect about everything. And then when you get drunk, you're just this, like, absolute god who just can say whatever you want and be yourself. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's that type of interest and tension. And is that a civilized tension? Who knows?
Yeah, and perhaps you could lay the hypothesis that if we weren't so up in our heads today, then we wouldn't have such a drinking crisis on our hands. Maybe people at college campuses wouldn't do stuff like that. It's not exactly like a crisis of every single drug. People aren't doing them all. They're just doing alcohol. And perhaps that's a case of legality, but it does make you think, if we were more harmonized, then maybe you wouldn't need that stark divide.
That's a really interesting point. Like, I'd love to explore that more, because people always say we should legalize everything, or, like, you know, there's some bad people that are trying to brainwash us into drinking too much and all this. But I wonder how much these problems can be laid at the feet of the spiritual state, like, let's call it psychological state of the species. Like, is it because we're so civilized that we need to become more degenerate? Like, would the correct solution to all this be, is it like resolution? Would it be to look at the kind of super story that we're living within and how we interact with the world now? It's a very good question. And I think something we should definitely start digging down a bit more.
Yeah.
because the vast array of problems tend to point that it must be a very, very high level solution. But I'm just a boyo, not proposing anything. Now let's talk a little bit about how this stuff becomes, like, real. Because this is all quite floozy. It's like, oh, you know, Greg's or Grug wandering around nature to go to Greg's and all that stuff in his little mini skirt and all that. And like, you know, collective unconscious symbols and all this. But Jung and Freud and a couple of other psychoanalysts, they started to notice something very, very strange, is that there was a connection between the symbols that appeared in people's dreams and sometimes pain, sometimes literal physical symptoms. Now, this should sit you down for like a year to think this through. And I actually, the next podcast I have coming up, I'm going to talk about my experience with this specific thing, because I went through it as well. It's amazing how psychological your injuries become, how your pain becomes. Like, people can be walking around and have a pain in their chest or something like that, and it could like stem all the way back to a story where they had a broken heart and they've been slightly lonely ever since. Like, this is something that I think they discovered through studies, is that if people are lonely, they start to get their heart starts to deteriorate in like a really, really strange way.
Yeah, dying of a broken heart. Yeah,
it's unbelievable. Yeah, and so they become more likely to suffer heart attacks because they've been lonely for so long. It's absolutely strange. Like, it's profound beyond belief. But that just goes to show that our body, like our heads, are not the place where our minds stop. Like, the whole thing is what we are. And that's there's a very basic way you can look at this, is that going into the unconscious is about diving back into the body mind and unearthing out that stuff. And like a lot of your quality of life is premised on how much you're fucking walking around like a train wreck full of pain. And at the very least, if you want to improve your life, won't you solve this? And so there's a mental side to it. And yes, Jung and Freud, they noticed this. And here's a story from it. A patient, for instance, who was confronted with an intolerable situation may develop a spasm whenever he tries to swallow. He can't swallow it. So like, it's that type of phrase. Under similar conditions of psychological stress, another patient has an attack of asthma. He can't breathe the atmosphere at home. And Jung would often say he'd be talking to someone and they'd use language like this, but they'd never make the connection, you know? Like, he would dig into them and they're like, oh, there's this heavy atmosphere at home. And it's like, oh, I can't breathe it in, you know? And then Jung would be like, when did your asthma start? And it's like, oh, fuck, around about when that person moved into the house or something like that. A third suffers from a peculiar paralysis. I can't pronounce. Paralysis of the leg.
Paralysis.
I'll give it over to the expert there. He can't walk. He can't go on anymore. A fourth, who vomits when he eats. He cannot digest some unpleasant fact. And so these things have, like, it seems weird. Like, it does seem kind of too easy, but the Jung found this stuff empirically, and he'll tell you about it more in the book.
Yep.
Any thoughts, Jimothy?
Yeah, so this is basically a complex, essentially. Complex is a word everyone knows colloquially. I have a complex about X, Y, Z. But this is what it's talking about, where something that's sort of physical is rooted in something mental, or vice versa, and the two of them can be connected. So the mind does indeed control the body. So, when you've got some Eastern practices, which are quite woo-woo, where it's like pain is all in the mind and pain is an illusion. To some degree, yeah, it might be, to be completely honest. So, and it really makes you reconsider the link between the mind and the body and what the hell we're actually doing. Because if you can, and this is a really, really strange thing. So if the mind can affect the body, then the body can affect the mind, right? So we know that the microbiome, for example, the bacteria that line your gut, depending on the composition of that, can actually influence your personality, which is you. Then you influence your microbiome and you change its composition through diet. So you can actually say that diet changes your personality, which is true. So incredibly strange. And it's something that we definitely need to go ahead and study, because then you actually be sowing things like big political divides between people, because you can imagine people who are vegan, you can imagine people who are carnivore, and you have in your mind the idea of what a vegan looks like and what a carnivore looks like. You got kind of like the more, well, you could basically say left wing, right wing, essentially. Or like less masculine, more masculine. And that's no value judgment. That's just the image, the symbol that comes to mind. How true is that at the end of the day? How true is it? I don't know.
I've been both a vegan and a carnivore, and that's actually something else I'll talk about in the next podcast. Next podcast is going to be fucking great, people. I cannot wait to put it out there. It's really good. I'm really proud of it. But I've been both, and I noticed that when I was in the vegan community, the way people would frame meat eaters is that they're always angry and stressed because they eat the meat and it makes them inflamed and angry. And the way that meat eaters frame vegans is that they're always weak and they have pathetic opinions because they don't eat anything that makes them strong and healthy. It's very, very interesting. Exactly what James is saying is the way, at the very least, they project this idea onto them. It's this like, in and out group, and then you've got this like character based on the food. You know what I mean? So it's a fascinating thing. And the thing that we'll get to in the next podcast, it's going to be so good, is the idea of solving these. Like, this is like, you read about Jung, you're like, oh, Jung's cool, I'm going to read a load of books. How about you actually go do it, motherfucker? How about you actually go and do shadow work? How about you actually go and change your life?
Calling people out, Jesus Christ.
How would you actually go and do it? Because you can, and you actually will get a result, and you'll actually understand this stuff better than if you read all the books. If you go into like Book Palace and you say, give me all the books on how to read books and all the books, and just you get them on, you just eat them if you want. Like it's going to do nothing compared to if you actually go through what Jung is saying here. And one thing is to dive into yourself and imagine your pain, your problems as like these symbols that have these like deep roots down in some unconscious experience, and seeing, can you dive in and see what they are? And I'll talk about it in my next podcast, what that was like for me. I'll show you. But you'll find childhood trauma there. You'll find that you need to reframe stuff. You need to re-memorize stuff. Your dreams will act as really good portals for you to get to this stuff. And some examples here is if people often take MDMA because they find it's way better to deal with post-traumatic stress. Why? Because MDMA makes you really happy, makes you really loving. And so post-traumatic stress is defined by this fear, this terror. And so if you're in this state of absolute joy and loving, and it's really hard to knock you out of that, it's really useful to think about past trauma, because then you reframe the past trauma in a far more compassionate way. You're a lot more easy on yourself, for example. It's good for couples therapies. There can be this trauma where one day, the man like scorned at the skirt the girl was trying to show off and being like, you've gotten a bit fat or something like that. And that's become this like traumatic moment that span. And this is how silly stuff like this can be. It can be tiny. It's spanned the whole relationship off course. And then you could take MDMA to get, I sound like a drug hustler again. You could take MDMA together, and then you can like refine that love for a moment and then reframe everything. And maybe you could find that love authentically. You go on a romantic date and do it the same. It will work the same thing. So
yeah,
these things will drive you, and they can even manifest as like wounds physically. And it will seem like a destiny. And Jung in this book even talks about sometimes when he noticed a few people come to him about like very strange, dangerous stuff. And he warned them, as like, okay, like some guy comes to him and says, oh, I believe that I had a dream about dying while skiing. And he was like, don't go skiing, whatever you do. And he goes skiing the next week and dies. And Jung's like, bro, like, I don't know how connected this stuff is. I don't know what's going on here. So,
yeah, I want to put a quick note in as well when you were saying about taking action. I think that's absolutely spot on, because you can think like, why did Jung do all of his work? Why did he bother writing the book? He didn't do it to give you a set of facts so that you can sort of sit there. And I've been here as well. I would imagine myself wearing a smoking jacket with a pipe indoors, pretending to be a really old man, thumbing through pages of a book that I don't understand at all. Just going, oh yes, I've integrated my shadow. And you'll be amazed at how many people I've spoken to that have gone, yeah, I've integrated my shadow. I've integrated my anima. I've met some people who've actually said, or one person in particular, who actually thinks that they've fully integrated their self. Like,
yeah.
Like, so Jesus Christ. Is that what you're saying? It's like, so, and you can think of it as you're only getting one bit of information, and it might resonate, it might tickle, it might rustle your jimmies a little bit, oh, that's really nice, the shadow. But until you go and put yourself out into the world, you're not learning anything else. And this is the case because when you go out into the world, you start having experiences, you put your persona on. Because who you are when you're thumbing your book is not who you are when you're with other people. You have a persona. Your brain changes its information. So if you go out into the world and integrate your shadow by walking through traffic, because that would technically, I mean, I don't recommend that, but that technically would be, taking a step towards fear. You walk into traffic and go, fuck you. That would at least be better than just sitting thumbing through your pages. And there's another thing that Nietzsche called people out. He was calling the people who read books for a living, or they philologists. He was like, you're basically all a bunch of complete pricks. All you do is you just thumb all day long. Like, get out there and go do these things for yourself.
Did you call it thumbing your jimmies?
Rustling my jimmies. It's rustling.
What?
Could you sort of quiver?
Could you explain the Anglo speak to the audience? Like, what is rustling your jimmies?
I don't think anyone knows. It's one of those ancient riddles that go back to ancient Anglo-Saxon times. But rustling my jimmies, it's like it's meant to be annoy you, I guess, or tantalize you, get a reaction. But I do like the image of someone sort of just, you get your naughty bits and you just sort of rustle them a bit, just.
So it'd be sort of like a haiku poem for an Englishman. He'd be like, bird calls in the morning, sun rises hour early, Someone rustles the jimmies.
Yes. Yes.
Beautiful, beautiful. The very good points, like absolutely brilliant points. Like you hear it so much. Like I'm on this quest versus jargon, and one part of that hate for jargon is the fact that people can come up to you and of course say like, oh, I actually integrated my shadow there the other day. And you're like, dude, like you gotta kind of break free. Just procedural thinking, like see what he says to do and then do it, and don't really give it a name. You know what I mean? Because
I've integrated my shadow. It's so funny. I don't know why it's so funny, but it is. And the reason why they're telling you is to appear smart, which means that they've
I don't know
persona, which means they've not gone a single step towards integrating their shadow.
Yeah, it's like I got it there, dude. I fucking got it. Like Jung says that you'll never integrate your shadow. He says that you'll spend your whole life, like it's literally a war for the entirety of your life. Like if you're very, in a rare occasion, you might do something profound and pull something out of your shadow, like yourself, and that will be like a Buddha level moment, a Christ level moment. But you're talking about an eternal war, and so since it's going to be an eternal war, you want to start looking more at the idea of what is he telling you to do, and then to do that. The same way as like, if you're going to the gym, you don't say to yourself, oh, well, I lifted some weights. And then you're like, done. There you go. Like, it's not like the power lifter, like lifts, like, the weights. And then he's like, that's it. And he just, I don't know, he crawls into a grave then. It's not like the strength even stays with him either. That's another thing to think about. Like if you lift the weight and you get like hit that personal record and all that, and then you're like, over, I'll be strong forever now. It's like the muscle's there and it's never going away. It's like, no, you got to look at it procedurally. And so this is when we start getting into this side of the book where Jung starts to imply this. Like he's very straightforward with it. It's like dream reading. This is why I started to look at dream reading. So I'm going to read this. This new thought was a turning point in the development of my psychology. It meant that I gradually gave up following associations that led far away from the text of a dream. I choose to concentrate rather on the associations to the dream itself, believing that the latter expressed something specific that the unconscious was trying to say. So this is where he's trying to give you advice on how to do dream reading. What Freud was doing is Freud would get someone to talk about a dream, and then he would say, someone would say, look, I met a woman in the dream. And Freud would be like, oh, that's your mother. And the guy would be like,
okay. Yeah, like, that's your mother and you want to have sex with her.
And then he's like, the woman put some toast in the toaster. And he's like, oh, well, the toast is in fact your penis. And the guy, like, I don't know, like my penis looks a bit different. Like the toast felt like something else. And it's like, yes, but you only feel that way because you're neurotic. And it became a bit of an issue for Jung. Jung was like, I don't know, bro. We're kind of telling people what they're dreaming as opposed to listening. And so Jung started to develop this idea that what you got to do is study the dream, almost like it's a movie, and try to figure out what the dream is saying. And this involves a really weird way of thinking, because this implies that the dream can say something. Okay. And so if you want to do this correctly, you pull the dream out and then you look at the dream and you try your best not to, use it as this sort of thing where you branch off and start like run away from it. Because the whole idea is that you want to avoid facing the shadow. You want to avoid facing your unconscious. So you'll take the dream and you'll start interpreting some nonsense associated with it because you don't want to actually face what the dream is saying. Like perhaps that childhood trauma was you got electrocuted, your mother got electrocuted by the toaster or something like that. You know what I mean? And it's like you just haven't confronted that or something like that. And that was the first time you ever saw you ever thought about losing her. Maybe she didn't die, but that was the first time you ever thought about losing her, and it's kind of stayed with you since. So that type of thing.
Well, maybe both are right, Freud and the patient. Maybe he put his dick in the toaster when he was younger, and that traumatized him.
Dude, like I don't know, like that wasn't the footnotes. Jung was like, in the case of the toaster, I must enlighten you about what actually happened. And so, a man may dream of inserting a key in a lock, of holding a heavy stick, or breaking a door with a battering ram. Each of these can be regarded as a sexual allegory, but the fact that his unconscious, for its own purposes, has chosen one of these specific images, maybe the key, the stick, the battering ram, is of major significance. The real task is to understand why the key has been preferred to the stick, or the stick to the ram. And sometimes this might even lead to one to discover that it is not the sexual act at all that is represented, but some quite different psychological point. So you're starting to see how interesting and funny it might have been when Freud and Jung were arguing with each other.
Well, Freud would probably counter that with, well, the difference between them is size. So if you've got the RAM, then it's trying to tell you maybe your dick isn't as big as you would like it to be.
I think Freud and Jung would probably, like, I wonder how much they talked about nutting and all that. Like, would they have been as bad as us? I don't really know. Whoops.
Well, apparently there are tons, like thousands of unreleased letters that Jung wrote. And they got the, I forget, is it C.G. Jung Foundation or the Philemon Foundation has them, and their job is to go through and publish them. I wonder if they're deliberately not being published because it is all about sort of the art of nutting nice mandalas onto the wall.
Sigmund. If I told you that I dreamed of putting my key in your lock, what would you say? Oh yeah, right. Or we've gone there. This is literally like, if we didn't have any credentials before, like we're burning through them now, literally like smoking them like they're cash or something. So Jung, works around the dream picture and disregards every attempt that the dreamer makes to break away from it. Time and time again in my professional work, I have had to repeat the words, "Let's get back to your dream. What does your dream say?" And so this is what Jung says is fundamental to this. You've got to imagine that there's an inner world that you have to explore, as opposed to you can use these things as what was Freudian, what was the association thing. You can think, all right, and you can allow yourself to fantasize off somewhere else. Perhaps the thing you really need to do is to firmly focus on the dream for a long period of time. So this is why I recommend when people dream read that they document a lot of their dreams, and then they try to look at similar themes and whatnot and kind of distill them out and be like, this is, and don't try to figure out what they are per se, but look at yourself more like you're trying to craft, you're trying to paint a picture. It's almost like you're looking into a fog and you've got all these dreams and they're like these dull lights. And what the whole process of dream reading is you collect all these dull lights, and then over time you brush away the fog and you start to see the lights more. And then over time you'll start to build an understanding of what these mean to you. And a lot of it will mean nothing, but for some of it will kind of pop through and you'll be like, wow, that really had something to it. So as I said, like some of my music has that going on in it.
I would highly recommend to everyone who wants to be a boyo out there. Nice picture, by the way.
Thank you, bro.
Anyone who wants to be a boyo out there, Boyo 101 would be get yourself a nice journal. You can splash out 20 quid maybe, write Boyo Dream Journal on the front of it, and then start documenting your dreams. And like when you'll start doing this, you'll think it's kind of weird and you'll get fragments, but it will start to make sense very, very, very quickly. Just start documenting them. I think it was Pauli, a physicist, one of Jung's friends we developed synchronicity with, documented like 10,000 of the dreams that he had, or 1,000 of the dreams that he had. And so Jung went through and observed them to see Pauli's own individuation process. So like you could consider like vlogs being like a way people can document their lives, and maybe everyone in the future will be vlogging with each other all the time so that, you know, you can look back on it and see what your life was like, which is really entertaining. You could do the exact same thing with your dreams and see that the themes, and all it would take is a couple minutes every single morning to just write it down or record with your voice what's happening, and it will be useful to you.
And if you want to even upgrade that even more, if you write your dream down in the morning, and then you write your in the evening, you write down your day and what was going through your head and all that stuff, like a diary, and you combine them both, you'll start to see some very strange patterns as well. That's a super interesting way to do it, is like, yes, what was going on in my life? What did I dream? What was going on in my life? What did I dream? So
yeah, because they usually surround complexes or big problems that you're having. A few of them, I've had a few interesting dreams actually involving items of clothing. So I wear like this Christian cross around my neck sometimes. I took it off one night, and that night I dreamt in the dream that was a big significant event, me taking off, like it was symbolic of like you've taken Christ off in whatever symbolic form that means. It wasn't particularly Christian either. It was symbolic. It's like, that's kind of really, really strange. In fact, last night I fell asleep listening to an Elvis Presley podcast, and I dreamed the whole night of Elvis Presley, which was very, very strange. So, you know, different things will affect you. But if I just took that idea of dreaming about Elvis in out of context of the rest of my life, I'd be like, well, I want to be Elvis Presley, which is not correct. But putting it in that context of what problems you're dealing with or things that you're experiencing in your life, yeah, I agree, Stefan, 100%.
And so Jung, oh my throat, take over for a sec.
We're looking at the vulgar woman today, and this vulgar woman's giving Stefan an allergic reaction. He's a very pure man. Just
she's so beautiful. Look at that makeup.
Is she fully naked? Actually, I'm not sure. If
No. She wearing pants and a bra.
Okay.
So what Jung goes through now, we're just going to read through a couple of the dreams that he brings up, the examples. He's very example heavy because that's a lot more. It's a lot easier to understand what he's saying through case studies and examples. He talks about the vulgar woman. A man has a dream, and he dreams of a drunken and disheveled vulgar woman. In the dream, it seems as this woman was his wife, though in reality, his wife was totally different. On the surface, therefore, the dream was shockingly untrue, and the patient immediately rejected it as dream nonsense. So this could be this situation like the Freudian one where it's like, oh, I dreamed of a woman in mud. And you could turn around and be like, oh, really? Well, the woman is your wife, and you know where mud comes from. You may want to, you know.
Oh my God, Jesus, Lord.
And then so Jung was like, okay, wait a second, this means something else. And so he would play with this guy, and the guy would like sort of would reject that. It's like, yeah, that's not my wife. Like, my wife is not like that. And he discovered that he had, like, you know, his female side, his anima, if you will. His dream was actually saying to him, you are in some respects behaving like a degenerate female. That's what the conclusion they discovered out of it. So like every man has like this sort of soft side where you want to curl up on the couch and like watch movies and all this stuff. And you could call it your emotional life, if you will. What was like the way other languages, for example, gender words. Like in French, you will have like I think the sun is male, but the moon is female, for example. And so you can see the way reality is gendered in that sense. And so sort of feminine behaviors are gendered psychologically in a weird way. You know what I mean? That's sort of what we're getting at with this anima thing. So you look at yourself and you would think the manly things I do, like go to the gym and all that, are all also balanced by the sort of feminine things that you do, that you would gender feminine, such as relaxation, taking care of yourself. Perhaps like you could think of yoga and stretching as like a feminine behavior, and then, you know, lifting weights is a masculine behavior. But if you do some yoga and stretching, you will improve your joint health, which will allow you to lift more weights. So there's this like dynamic going on all the time. And so this particular guy seemed to have this situation where when he would get in touch with his feminine side, whichever way he would do it, he would curl up and he would drink loads of wine and read romantic novels about how his life could be, or something like that.
Yes, and this is a very it's a very, very interesting point, because a lot of people, and for whatever reason, think that dreams are often about other people. So if I dream about Stefan, I've not dreamt about you in a very long time, actually. Obviously, I've spoken to you a lot. I think I've had one dream with you before over the last year. I don't remember what it was. But if I dream about
could you tell me that dream, and I'll be Freud and you can be Jung?
Yeah, you're like bending over on the floor, and I was sort of slapping you. And it was horrendous. But if I was dreamt about you, I might think that it was about you. So if I was dreaming about making love to you, then I might think that my unconscious needs to make love with you. But that's not completely right, because the unconscious isn't concerned about you, Stefan. Sorry, it's concerned about me because it's my unconscious. So you are the totality of all the psychic processes going on in your head. And so what it wants to do is complement for you. So Stefan in my dream would appear as a symbol of something within me, which is why that in that particular dream wasn't like the woman wasn't his wife. It was a symbol of something within him. So you've got to always relate it back to yourself, which in many ways actually makes it much, I think, more exciting and more authentic to deal with dreams, because you're looking into your own soul. So I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, Jung did emphasize that quite a lot. He was saying, try always frame it this way and go from there, and it becomes very interesting. So that is that is one thing to keep in mind. It's like when you dream about someone, it's not like, you know, you dream about someone losing their job, and then you text them, be like, oh my God, did you lose your job? And they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I'm doing fine. So it's not that way, but that's only a theory. Like, I've heard other people suggest that, no, you should see it that way. It's the spirits interacting. So we don't know, but if we're talking about Jung, this is what Jung suggests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Back into the unconscious. I recall a woman who was once admitted to the clinic in a state of complete stupor. Oh yes. So what he's talking about here, this is almost like him showing evidence that we have unconscious that is almost aware and intelligent and living. because we think of ourselves as like, you know, rational minds, and when we go to sleep, that's the end of that, and there's nothing alive. Life comes with ego or something like that. But he's like, no. I recall a woman who was once admitted to the clinic in a state of complete stupor. When she recovered consciousness the next day, she knew who she was, but did not know where she was, how or why she had come there, or even the date. Yet after I hypnotized her, you know, hypnotizing women, game young, she told me she had fallen ill, how she had got to the clinic, and who admitted her. All these details could be verified. She was even able to tell the time which she had been admitted, because she had seen a clock on the entrance hall. Under hypnosis, her memory was as clear as if she had been completely conscious all the time.
Dun, dun, dun.
Very, very fascinating, you know? So there's something blocking her understanding, and Jung explains that she had like a neurosis that kind of held her back, and she's got this like divided head, if you know what I mean. It's so strange. And so the big question is like, how do you break up that division and allow this woman to be able to remember things? You know what I mean? And here we go, the farmer. An example of this.
I didn't see that. I didn't, because your face was covering that, so I thought it was your face over it. But it's me. I'm a farmer. Very well done.
I was waiting on, like, when is he going to see it? The farmer. An example of this that I found particularly revealing was provided by the professor who had been walking in the country with one of his pupils, absorbed in serious conversation. Suddenly he noticed that his thoughts were being interrupted by an unexpected flow of memories from his early childhood. He could not account for this distraction. Nothing in what had been said seemed to have any connection with these memories. On looking back, he said that he had been walking past the farm when the first of these childhood recollections had surged up in his mind. He suggested to his pupil that they should walk back to the point where the fantasies had begun. Once there, he noticed the smell of geese. Now, people, you'll know this. And instantly he realized that it was the smell that had touched off the flow of memories. In his youth, he had lived on a farm where geese were kept, and their characteristic smell had left a lasting, though forgotten, impression. As he passed the farm on his walk, he had noticed the smell subliminally, and this unconscious perception had called back long forgot Ten's experiences of his childhood. The perception was subliminal because the attention was engaged elsewhere, and the stimulus was not strong enough to deflect it and to reach consciousness directly, yet it had brought up the forgotten memories. Such a cue or a trigger effect can explain the onset of neurotic symptoms as well as mere benign memories, when a slight smell or sound recalls a circumstance in the past. Now, you will all know this. Like, this is very fascinating, right? Try to imagine the smell of something, and most people will not be able to do that. But when you walk in a place that has that smell, you will immediately memorize what that smell is associated with. Say, for example, a farm. Like, you grew up in a farm, and if you go to another farm that has a similar smell, bang, your head will be back there. But if right now, if you're in the city and it's like, imagine that smell, you cannot do it for the life of you. But if I ask you to imagine the farm, you can visualize it, because our brains are much more visual than they are nasal, if you know what I mean. So we're a lot better at doing that, but we can't do this. But this unconscious, this, I guess you could say, lesser sense still has a profound influence on us. And neurologically, the nose is more connected to the amygdala, I believe, than most other senses. So that's why it has such a profound memory trigger in that sense. But it's very interesting how that stuff works. Any thoughts, Jimmy?
Yeah, you do it with music as well. Music is a really big one for me. I used to be taken to Disney World as a kid, which is like, and I dream about Disney World, by the way, all the time. Every 2 out of 3 dreams, Disney World is in there. And I think it's a symbol for me of the kingdom of God, because it's a literal kingdom and it's associated with happiness and family and whatever. And if I hear music that plays in the parks, tracked, it actually brings me to tears straight away. Whenever I discover this song again, I always send it to my family again. Always. It's like, remember this, remember this, remember this. And my parents don't really remember. They're like, what the hell are you talking about? But my brother does, because he's like a couple years younger than me. I'm like, oh my God, yeah, I remember this. Do you remember standing by the fountain? Do you remember? Oh, so happy, so happy, so happy. Very strange. And music, of course, is only just sound waves that hit your ear. So on top of that.
Yeah, another one is when I'm walking through the street and I pass by a girl and her perfume is the same as one of my exes.
Oh my God.
And I immediately start
rock hard.
Yeah, well, I know. I just start thinking about her, you know, and it's so interesting because I wouldn't have thought about her for years, and then that smell comes and you're like, oh shit, suddenly you're back there. But it's only because of the perfume. It's so strange. And I couldn't for the life of me know what that smell is now. Like I couldn't even begin to conceptualize it, because we're not like dogs. Dogs probably have this like amazing ability to conceptualize smells and like categorize them and store them the way we store ideas and all this. But me, no, it's more like, oh, right, all right, there's the smell again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Only when I'm around it. And another example, and what Jung is sort of suggesting by this, is that like when I had an injury, which I'm going to talk about in the coming podcast, I would hear certain ideas. It's so strange. I would hear an idea such as bend your back, or fold over. And then I could see someone, touch their toes, for example. And I had this belief that there's something wrong on my back. And when I'd see someone touch their toes, it would hurt in my body, even though I had done nothing different. It would hurt. It was like a trigger. Yeah, it's so strange, isn't it? Really so it's like weird. These things trigger the experience, the feeling. And I'll get into pain science in that next podcast, where this has actually been backed up by how disconnected our feelings, our pain is to what's actually damaged in our body, and how much more connected it is to what our brain thinks, what our brain dreams, what the story is in our head, which is fascinating. Okay. So Jung gives us a bit of a how-to after understanding all this stuff. What we're doing is we're sort of pulling up. We're trying to find those symbols, and we're trying to like dig into them and pull them up and see what's going on. The two fundamental points in dealing with dreams dreams are this. First, the dream should be treated as a fact about which one must make no assumption except that it somehow makes sense. And second, the dream is a specific expression of the unconscious. And that's pretty much it. That's like the two things he gives you.
Easy.
Yeah, I thought it was supposed to be more dramatic, but no, that's what he gives. He says these two things are important. You have to treat it as it's a real deal, and it's coming out of this place, and the unconscious is loaded with this idea that it's got like an intelligence of sorts. It's not stupid. It's not meaningless. Actually, it's not a meaningless thing that you can project your interpretation onto. You must look at it a lot more like it's trying to teach you something, which is a very strange idea.
Yeah, you should look at it almost as a friend, actually, which reminds me of a vision that I had of, I've told before of my Green Lady vision. And one of the things that she said to me was respect the unconscious, which is it's a very ominous thing to say. But the unconscious is not, when you first get into stuff like the shadow, you might think that the unconscious is always there waiting to kill you. It's not quite the case. It coexists with you. Think of it as a separate personality, a collection of other personalities. We have no idea. But if the dreams tell you things that when you figure out what they mean, you generally have an aha. And it's not a rational aha.
Yes.
It's a feeling aha. You're like, thanks, dream. That's really useful. But sometimes you don't want to be told the truth. Like sometimes tell Stefan things about how poor his performance is. He sort of cries his eyes out and he's like, I don't want to hear it. But he's grown up into a nice mature man over the course of the last year. So now he can understand. It's the same thing with dreams. They kind of want to help you. So
is that why you were dreaming of spanking me? It was because of my poor performance.
Yes, yeah, it was. That you're derailing the entire YouTube channel. So I have to spank you into submission.
Oh, I thought, see, I'm Freud here, so I thought the poor performance was related to something much different, if you understand.
Moving on.
You're half Irish, aren't you? So if we're to say the dreams are this sort of internal thing that's going on, and you're here spanking spanking an Irishman for poor performance, are you sure you're not like, I don't know, spanking the Irish side of yourself? And isn't your dad Irish? So doesn't that mean that the Irish side of yourself is, you could say, the gendered part of yourself? So you're in some sense spanking that. Okay, I'm going.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I never think about that. Although you are insulting the Irish in doing so.
I know. I got to stop. That's got to stop. All right. Jung talks about his dreams before we just get too retarded now.
That's spanking Irishman. Is that? I remember a dream. It's in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections where he was actually spanking an Irishman.
I'm sure. Can you see the picture? This one. I made this picture.
Oh, hang on. Let's see. I can't. Oh, for fuck's sake.
Okay.
His head's on backwards like an owl.
I know, yeah. I was like, this just doesn't even make sense at this point. Jung recalled one dream of mine that I found difficult to interpret. This dream, a certain man was trying to get behind me and jump on my back. James.
Yeah, it reminds me of my dream.
I knew nothing of this man except that he was somehow, I picked up a remark that I had made. Oh my God, the spelling is so bad at this. And had blown it up into a grotesque travesty of my meaning. So he's saying that this man jumped on his back and was taking up an idea that he made, and he was suggesting that it meant something really bad, and so he jumped on Jung's back to kind of like tackle him, if you will. I could not see the connection between this fact and his attempt in the dream to jump on me. So he couldn't see the connection between this guy feeling that Jung said something awful and attacking him and all this. But then in his professional life, he noticed that people often misrepresented what he said. So often that he scarcely bothered to wonder whether this kind of misrepresentation made him angry. So it always happened to Jung where people were like, "Oh, you're trying to say that dreams are God, and you're just a nonsense professor and all this." And he heard this so often, he was slandered so often, he was like, "I don't care anymore." But he didn't realize that deep down that he was getting pissed off by this. Like, it did actually affect him. And so he soon realized that the point the dream was making had come in the form of an Austrian colloquialism. I first read that as Australian, so I was like, why Australian? The phrase is "you can climb on my back," which means I don't care what you say about me. An American equivalent would be "go jump in the lake," hence the picture here. So this is this sort of notion of, it was coming to Jung. Jung was sort of perhaps not quite conscious of how angry he was getting about this. And I guess you could say there's probably a lot more to this, but perhaps he was letting all this stuff climb in his back, and maybe on some level it was getting too heavy, or maybe the dream was trying to say, become conscious of what's going on here, because this could be turned into a problem if you don't solve it now. You know, imagine then if, you know, when someone insults you, you sort of do submissive behavior. You bend over a little bit. You drop your head down. Like if someone just castigates you, you'll drop your head and you'll take that more like fetal position. You won't stand up proud and strong. Jordan Peterson's like, stand up straight with your shoulders back. Like that, the opposite of that is when you feel a little bit ashamed. So if someone keeps on insulting you over time, or loads of people do, like maybe it will start to eke its way into your mind. And Jung is using this metaphor, if you can climb on my back. And so would that weight start to pressure him? And maybe, like, I don't know, this is such a leap here, but imagine it would start to, I don't know, damage his back or leave him more exposed to injuries. You don't really know this stuff.
Could be. Definitely could be.
Yeah. So then we're going to talk about this.
You can see, nice picture again. Thank you. Right, the cow, very funny. You can also see, of course, the use in knowing how to interpret dreams correctly, or at least semi-correctly. Or like, rather than keep bottling up the pain, if the unconscious tells you you have pain here, then you're actually kind of more likely to listen to it than if someone else came you and told to you yourself. So I guess it just highlights the use.
I guess that's a really practical way to look at this. Is it will help you preemptively solve problems. You know what they say? It's like the prevention is better than the cure type idea. So this is almost like, as I'm saying, like how it could spiral out of control. Perhaps Jung could get a damaged back. And imagine if it was rooted, because this, like, as much as crazy as that sounds, when you work with people on this psychological level, you find this is actually how this stuff works. Again, the next podcast, I will show you how this massive spiral out of control happened for me, based on like one very, very simple idea. And this is how it works with people. They get this little sort of, they get insulted. And the way their head deals with it says, you can climb on my back. It's very strange. And then this little collection, this little mythology starts to build up around this experience. And then if you don't deal with it properly, it spirals into this weight psychologically that you're carrying, where you hurt your back, and then you hurt your back, a load of other stories get piled on top of it, like I'm not good enough or whatever, or all that stuff. And so eventually you won't really solve this until you tackle this root issue. And it's so strange how it works. It's very, very profound. So this is why we're recommending it. And so the shadow then is like a funny way to think about it is the dreams are teasing you. The dreams are trying to, you've got this like conception about the world. Oh, you can climb on my back. You know, there's no, like, I don't need to deal with these problems and all this. And the dreams are sort of poking in with these really witty ways of showing you that you actually, like, you're not all that you think you are. Because with Jung, perhaps he was sort of arrogantly ignoring it. And then the dream pokes in with this brilliant, it's almost like a satire of like, yeah, here's what's going on. And so I really think this is the best way to look at dreams, is like they're almost trying to make fun of you or something like that, because they do come up with such profound wit and nonsense, and they can really like break you down and stop you taking yourself serious, and they can reframe stuff to really make you understand. So Jung gives another example. There was, for instance, a lady who was well known for her stupid prejudices and her stubborn resistance to reasoned arguments. One could have argued with her all night to no effect. She would have had taken not the slightest notice. Her dreams, however, took a different line of approach. One night she dreamed she was attending an important social occasion. She was greeted by the hostess with the words, "How nice that you've come. All your friends are here and they are waiting for you." The hostess then led her to the door and opened it, and the dreamer stepped through into a cowshed.
Well, technically, that's not what happened. The words were "horv nice that you could come," and they are revating for you. How do you misspell so badly?
I copied it off archives because I couldn't be bothered typing it out from the book. And so this is just a really, really unprofessional example again, guys. Please try not to take us too serious. You see, you see how bad this stuff is. Yeah, there should be a couple of more misspellings here. So the idea is that you're on autopilot. This is what he means by like you must make the unconscious conscious, or else it'll drive your life, and you will call it destiny. This is what he means by you must do this stuff. As I said, stuff like this will spiral out of control and lead to bad stuff down the line. And if you've already had a massive injury or you've had some disaster happen, you'll probably have to go into this space to solve it. You'll have to dive into the roots, and go into the ancient traumas that are fueling it, if you will. And so you'll have personality habits. You'll have all sorts of stuff. Like you'll do things. You'll be completely unaware of why you do them. You'll have this little story, but if you inspected that story, it'll be just utter bullshit, you'll find. Like, for example, Jung with his, like, you can put that on my back thing. It's like, oh, I decided to put it on my back because I didn't want to deal with it. You're like, well, I've never heard such bullshit in my life. So what, you're going to avoid the problem? You're going to avoid the fact that it's pissing you off? No, face it. You've got to deal with it somehow. So you will have these personality habits and you need to start confronting them. Dreams are a good place to start. Good place to aim. There are other ways to do this, but the whole idea here is that you're on this autopilot and you're charging towards some type of destiny that is getting fueled by your personality. And so you may as well go in and sort this personality out so it doesn't drive you towards some disaster of some sort. Mm-hmm. It's not merely the shadow side of our personalities that we overlook, disregard, and repress. We may also do the same to our positive qualities. And so this is where it's like, all right, as negative as we avoid the negativity. What if your greatest potential was hidden here? Do you want to save yourself from that? And then what Jung will teach you is that both of those things are there. The worst side of yourself and the best side of yourself. So if you want to just stay mediocre and maybe in a little bit of pain, keep doing what you're doing, bro. Mm. An example that comes to mind is that of an apparently modest and self-effacing man with charming manners. He always seemed content with a back seat, but discreetly insisted on being present. When asked to speak, he would offer a well-informed opinion, though he never intruded it. But he sometimes hinted that a given matter could be dealt with in a far superior way at a certain higher level, though he never explained how. In his dreams, however, he constantly had encounters with great historical figures such as Napoleon and Alexander the Great. These dreams are clearly compensating for an inferiority complex. But they had another implication. What sort of man must I be, the dream was asking, to have such illustrious callers? Mm. So what do you think, James? Do you think
I'd love to have dreams like that, but I don't. So I read that as unless you have dreams like that, you're not going to be great, which is not true. That's called a projection. And I don't have dreams like that, so I'm not meant to be great. It's really cool, though. It's really cool. So it's almost like you're not living up to your potential. So the unconscious is like your father going, no, do your homework properly. Go on, make something of yourself. Very cool.
Yeah. Yes. This is then archetypes. This is where the woo comes in, and people love this stuff more than anything. Jimmy, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Do you by any chance have the book there? And are there pictures of this particular section?
There might be.
The dreams, the 8-year-old's dreams, where she has these like crazy things. So at the start,
we talk for a minute. I'll see if I can find them.
Okay. At the start, we discussed the idea of symbols. And these symbols can lead us into something that is almost eternal and shared. Even though I will die, these symbols will live on. It's a very, very strange thing. And so it's almost like there's this shared collection of symbols that we have, which on one hand we call our culture, but then what happens when you start looking cross culturally, this stuff starts to expand and turn into this like global set of symbols. It's very, very profound. And then people are always trying to, Joseph Campbell tried the Heroes in a Thousand Faces to make sense of the kind of cross-cultural archetypes, and you see certain things keep on showing up, but no one's really figured out, how do we make it unify at all in some sense. But nonetheless, you look at all this stuff and you start to see things oscillating around consistent ideas. And Jung called these archetypes. The 4 is an archetype, you'd call it, and the mandala is an archetype. He call it the self in some sense. These are central ideas that will almost definitely show up everywhere. And so he has a dream. He gets an 8-year-old. Her dad comes to him and says, bro, young bro, what's up, man? What's up, my man? This is very weird.
What the fuck are you talking about?
My little girl is having these crazy dreams, man. They're out of this world. And I don't know what they mean. Like, he was a Protestant, so not very religious. He was not very religious Protestant. He didn't really very rational in that type of sense. But then his daughter starts having these profound dreams, and she hadn't been that religious or anything like that. So we found it very strange. And so this 8-year-old, she had one dream, the first one. Jung called this the weirdest series that he's ever listened to. The evil animal, a snake-like monster with many horns, kills and devours all other animals. But God comes from the 4 corners, being in fact 4 separate gods, and gives rebirth to all the dead animals. Number 2, she ascends into heaven where pagan dances are being celebrated. And then she descends into hell where angels are doing good deeds. Number 3, a horde of small animals frightens her. The animals increase to a tremendous size, and one of them devours the little girl.
Are you sure she didn't just steal too many cookies from the cookie jar before going to sleep?
Daddy, what are these cookies here, mate?
So her name was Bazza or Terry.
Right. Terriette, like. Daddy, I had a bit too much Greg's and I'm starting to see stuff now, Daddy. 4, a small mouse is penetrated by worms, snakes, fishes, and human beings. Thus the mouse becomes human. This portrays the 4 stages of the origin of mankind. 5, a drop of water is seen as it appears when looked at through a microscope. The girl sees that the drop is full of tree branches. This portrays the origin of the world. 6, a bad boy has a clod of earth and throws bits of it at everyone who passes. In this way, all the passerbys become bad. A drunken woman falls into the water and comes out renewed and sober. The scene is America, this is number 8, where many people are rolling on an ant heap, being attacked by the ants. The dreamer, in a panic, falls into the river. 9, there is a desert on the moon where the dreamer sinks so deeply into it that into the ground that she reaches hell. 10, in this dream, the girl has a vision of a luminous ball. She touches it. Vapors emanate from it. A man comes and kills her. 11, the girl dreams she is dangerously ill. Suddenly birds come out of her skin and cover her completely. Swarms of gnats obscure, and this is number 12, swarms of gnats obscure the sun, the moon, and all the stars except one. That one star falls upon the dreamer. And so this is very, very strange for Jung, because this is an 8-year-old, and James is dreaming about spanking Irishmen, and Jung is dreaming about guys giving out to him and all this, and then this girl comes in, and it's like you could imagine seeing something like this in the foundational myths of a tribe you meet out in the Amazon or Africa or something like that. Like it's that rich, it's that profound, and it's not very personal at all. Like, what the hell does this relate to the girl's life and all this? And so in this case, the father was convinced the dreams were authentic. I have no reason to doubt it. I knew the little girl myself, but this was before she gave her dreams to her father. So I had no chance to ask her about them. She lived abroad, and she died of an infectious disease about a year after that Christmas. So it's very, very strange. Like, what was going on here? We don't know. Did the girl break through to the archetypes? It's very, very hard to tell. But it's almost like Jung noticed through studying enough of people that there was this mode where people would enter and start having dreams like this. And like, if you want to do it, he said, you're probably not going to get to do it. It usually happens in some sense. This is why it's procedural. Like, do the dreams and try to work through them and get the kind of basic stuff. And then stuff like this sometimes starts appearing. And it can be quite a little treat to be among the gods, if you will, be among the archetypes. It's like entering, Middle Earth. Like, Tolkien lived in Middle Earth, and that was sort of his place where he played with the archetypes. Like, maybe you'll kind of crack open the little void, the little Narnia, and this stuff will start shining out. But again, you got to keep it procedural and not focus on that too much. My advice, anyway.
Yeah, I'm going to guess butt in. When did you want me to show the pictures? Lead up.
Show them now.
Yeah. So the idea with the idea of archetypes is she didn't see these strange images in her own life. They stemmed from something deeper. Like when you were talking, Stefan, about those four characters: the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Animal characters. You didn't think of that. It just exists within us. So they're sort of ruptured forward. So Jung, and this is almost an incentive, an unboxing of man and his symbols, if you like. So it's quite a large book. There you go. Makes a nice sound. But it comes with so many beautiful pictures, some of which are color, some of which are black and white. So he goes through the girl's dream and he points out what each of the different motifs mean in an archetypal image. So, for example, the death and rebirth stuff you've got there is like Christ on his cross doing his death and rebirth things. And we've got, again, there, the four corners of the earth. We've got four doors in Westminster Abbey. And he goes on and on and on with images of angels and sleeping men and monsters that are devouring you in the dark. He goes and he points out where all of these different images have already existed throughout mankind as images that we've somehow produced and resonate with us. And it looks like her psyche sort of went full Nietzsche mode, I guess. So she died immediately afterwards. Just goes full explosion, I guess.
Yeah, and there's something to think about. Like, I wonder is that what happened with Nietzsche? Who knows? It's hard to know. Oops. Jesus, don't do that. I almost ended the meeting.
Don't do that. Don't be rash now.
Don't be brash. I'm sick of James now. Back to man and his boyos. So the collective unconscious then, and this is what we're sort of getting at, one cannot be afforded to be naive in dealing with dreams. They originate in a spirit that is not quite human, but rather a breath of nature, a spirit of the beautiful and generous, as well as of the cruel goddess. Primitive man was much more governed by his instincts than his rational modern descendants, who have learned to control themselves. In this civilizing process, we have increasingly divided our consciousness from the deeper instinctive strata of the human psyche, and even ultimately from the somatic basis of the psychic phenomenon. Fortunately, we have not lost these basic instinctive strata. They remain part of the unconscious, even though they may express themselves only in the forms of dream images. I can illustrate this by my experience with a primitive tribe in East Africa. And you're going to love this, my man. To my amazement, these tribesmen denied that they had any dreams. But through patient, indirect talks with them, I soon found out that they had dreams just like everybody else, but that they were convinced their dreams had no meaning. Dreams of ordinary men mean nothing, they told me. They thought that the only dreams that mattered were those of the chiefs and the medicine men. These, which concerned the welfare of the tribe, were highly appreciated. The only drawback was that the chief and the medicine man both claimed that they had ceased having meaningful dreams. They dated this change from the time that the British came to the country. The district commissioner, the British official in charge of them, had taken over the function of the great dreams that had hitherto guided the tribe's behavior.
Damn right.
When these tribesmen conceded that they did not have any dreams, when these tribesmen conceded that they did have dreams, but thought them meaningless, they were like the modern man who thinks that a dream has no significance for him simply because he does not understand it. So again, everything is the English's fault.
Yes.
I think end podcast right there. I think what Jung was trying to say here is be wary of the eternal Anglo. This is like they come in and they take your dreams. That's pretty much what he's trying to say.
So this is a good case study actually, because what Stefan is doing is something called a projection. And Jung talks a lot about projections, but it's something that you shouldn't do because it's a sign of a weak mind. And also, Jung also wrote in Collected Works 13, it's also a sign of a small penis as well. So there you go.
Speaking of small penises, I've noticed that when you try to project it, it does come out in a very, very weak small, shall we say, distance. You don't quite project as much as you should, if you will. So I can't believe we're actually going to put this up public.
When is this stream going to end? When are we done today?
I know, yeah. Okay, it's coming pretty close. All right. So what I've called civilized consciousness has steadily separated itself from the basic instincts, but these instincts have not disappeared. A network of so what he's sort of saying is that yes, like we tended to have networks of interpreting symbols, the authority of your symbolum, he called it. Christianity was our one, and we're now going through the death of God, as Nietzsche said, and that's like a very bad thing because it's like these tribal men. Suddenly our dreams are meaningless. There's no God to connect us to this sort of big world of like super symbols and all that. There's this disconnection. And Jung was like desperately afraid of that for us. I thought that was going to be a very, very bad thing. And another example that I found interesting when I was younger is how the Aussie Aborigines dealt with Christianity, because the Europeans came over and like colonized them, and then they took from them their dreams for these precise reasons. And so all of these people were kind of put in places where they would live, because they like the Australians came over and they set up Melbourne, they set up the cities, and the Australian dream world, the myth they had was very much tied to the land. They needed all the land to be have integrity. But then these Aussies came in and they were Irish, so they came in and they just took the space, and then they took the space and that destroyed the entire dream. The entire dream collapsed with that. And so then these people all were converted to Christian, and then they were given modern industrial housing and modern industrial diets. And what these people, they didn't have like hundreds of years to adapt to this stuff, and they're kind of treated quite offhandedly because Australia was just getting started. And so they ended up just drinking lots of alcohol and eating lots of sugar, which is like definitely the worst way you're going to do this. They essentially destroyed their culture. The entire Dreamtime thing just died. And you hear them talk about that. And so, yes, there is this sort of, the way that this would have worked for us in the past is we would have had the myth to help us. The Greeks had their symbolum, we had Christianity, and all of this stuff would be contextualized properly. And so the question is, well, we don't have that. And here's a hypothesis. People bitch about all the problems going on in the world right now, but is the solution at this level? Is it about resurrecting the myth?
Mm.
The death of God, yes. So exactly what I was just saying there. Men already took the view that myth was too improbable to mean what it says. So yet centuries ago in what we call ancient Greece, men's minds were advanced enough to summarize that the tales of the gods were nothing but archaic and exaggerated traditions of long bullioned kings or chieftains. Men already took the view that myth was too improbable to mean what it said. They therefore tried to reduce it to a generally understandable form. Now there's an interesting idea. The death of God has not happened recently. It's happened before many times.
Mm-hmm.
Hellenic Greece had this problem towards the end of Rome. Hellenism was like the Greco-Roman religion where it became too rational, and the only people who really connected with it were the philosophers who understood it. And so Christianity comes in with vibrant and new perspective that people actually believed in, just destroys the Hellenic worldview because people are like, it's just philosopher nonsense. It doesn't move me, And so this stuff has happened before, and like obviously we're going through it now. So what does it mean? And so I think Jung's conclusion.
Become a fountain.
This is
you meant that in a naughty way, didn't you?
I didn't actually. That's your Freudian mind coming in. So since our symbolism has been cleaved by our reason, so what murdered our God was our reason. It's up to us to reawaken this. Terence McKenna says, stop consuming culture, start creating culture. So again, this is the sort of hypothesis. People are like, politics will sort it out. And most certainly, I'm sure there's sides to all that stuff. And, like everybody going to the gym will sort it out. I'm sure that's a part of it. But I wonder at what resolution we should be looking at, like resurrecting the software program. And Terence McKenna, a very interesting person to drop in here, would say that the very worst thing you can do in our current materialistic consumerist world is consume and think that you're going to find the solution. Reading all the books, watching all the films. That's not going to get you anywhere. What's going to get you somewhere is if you start being a source. You start understanding that your individual experience, if whatever is your nature, whatever you are, can produce something of immense value if you just dig into yourself and find it and pull it out of you. So it's almost artistic in that sense. So I guess like I'm sort of, whatever I'm doing with this is I really want to be this. I really want to put out an energy of like, we need to start asserting our cultural reality. We need to start being artists. We need to start looking at that way. We need to start being creative in all that sense. Because I find a lot of people who understand problems, but I find very little people who are willing to commit to execution or commit to solutions. You know what I mean? Like the solutions are quite obvious. They're quite simple. Like get healthy, get unified, hold people together in that sense, give people something that's positive, and of course create. And people just don't want to do that. They want to do everything but the one thing that will solve the problem, and they wonder why we're we've got problems and all this. So I adhore you to take what Jung is saying and do it, and go down and think to yourself, right, I'm going to dig down to this sort of inner world and pull something back out of it. And so what I'm trying to say is obviously there's a profound religious movement currently at play: environmentalism, super capitalism, globalism, equality, tolerance overall, everything. This whole massive movement of whatever we're moving towards. And maybe the idea is that we have to like ride on top of this, or I don't know what we do with this, but it's spinning out of control. It feels people are kind of going a bit crazy for look over at America. Like people are polarizing. Both sides hate each other based on all these lines. Some people are like, don't globalize. Some people are like, globalize everything. Some people are trying to be like in the middle. Some people are like communism. Some people are like only capitalism. Some people are like, nah. And so it's getting like nearly aggressive at this point. And so this floozy Boyos solution, I'm sort of like, well, could we look at dreams as a source where we pull that stuff out, and we do it all as this like, we believe in something almost on faith, which is the creative spirit, the thing that is human, the thing that marks us as what matters, the thing that Christ said. It's that you have that source inside your soul, find it and use it, and it will save you. That type of idea. So I don't know. There's something to think about. Any thoughts, Jimmy?
Yeah, and I definitely agree. And you can frame it in many different resolutions. Like, where are we going to get the solution to the spiritual crisis from? Well, we should read our dreams. It's like, well, yeah, maybe. But at the end of the day, you don't want to be living a lie. I don't want to be living a lie. Maybe Stefan does, because his existence is fucking unbearable. So you want to know what the truth is. And if you're going through life, this is why reading Jung is actually quite a healthy thing to do in many ways, because he points out specifically how you're living a lie. He talks about the shadow, and he talks about the persona and all these other jargony terms. That's basically what it means. Is, are you a harmonious whole? And the things that you believe, are they actually making you happy and feeling strong on the inside? Because, we've talked about the relationship between the mind and the body. There is an idea of physiological integrity where you feel strong. So when you wake up in the morning, you actually feel good about yourself versus feeling bad about yourself. And your dreams will help you fill in the gaps where you are. They want to help you out and be like, you're missing something here, you're missing something here. Take into account, even if it's difficult, take into account what I'm telling you, and you can become a better person. So even if the big political questions, they're way out of my grasp, but probably out of your grasp too. But at the very least, we can start making ourselves stronger. And that starts with removing all of the lies that we keep telling ourselves. Biggest
Absolutely.
one, of course, the persona. And this as well, like if we've talked to a lot of boyos who are in our Discord, for example, and a lot of them, they have complexes, you could say, around speaking the truth and about honesty. And that's a persona issue. So what you want to do is to go out and speak your mind to people. You want to be a strong masculine man speaking to people. This is what I believe. These are my political views. This is what I think about family. This is what and most of the time it's on the more conservative side, but people don't, because it's scary. But then later on, they'll beat themselves up about it. It's like, who is doing the beating up exactly? Is it you, or is it something else? And people will have dreams, and they'll have strange visions and experiences which rip them to pieces about this. And that's all this dream work is all about, is to go, maybe you should have some courage and actually speak the truth. And trust me, it will be okay.
Yep. So, what's the best Carl Jung book to start with? I would recommend this. I would recommend this book, and I would recommend you not think that, all right, now I have to become a scholar in Jung, because this is going to be controversial, but have the Jungian scholars really achieved anything? Like, we're still in the same spiritual crisis. Like, what have the ones who've gone all in on this really pulled out of it? You know what I mean? Like, there's something to really think about there.
I agree.
Isn't it about doing it? Like, as I said, I don't think these problems are difficult. I think they're very, very simple. The difficult part is executing. The difficult part is executing consistently. You will do anything to avoid action. It's a profound, and I'm not saying this because I'm like, you, I see you. I'm saying this because it's me. Like, I struggle to act as much as I should. I struggle to execute as much as I should, and I'm always rationalizing, giving myself reasons why I don't have to. But this is all you have to do. You have to say, okay, well, here's the basics. Let me start doing that. And maybe then when you start confronting more advanced problems, then you can start going back to Jung and reading his works. And suddenly you'll have all this experience, these references that are your own experience, that you will be able to actually interpret his works far more profoundly. And then you will start to, you will actually learn, as opposed to fill your head full of theory. Do you know what I mean?
Couldn't agree more. I think that's spot on.
Thank you, James. For once we agreed. That was like probably the only time that'll ever happen, guys. I think you should take out a glass of whiskey and tip it off there. Do what he says, the basics. Read your dreams. Now, I recommend you combine this with creative work. So have something you're doing in the world, or as we said, as James was saying earlier, dreams and diary or something like that. Get it aimed on producing something, but also honor them the way Jung is talking about here. Shadow work. So I talk about this a lot. Just be really real with yourself, man, and just turn on and be like, what am I avoiding facing? Dreams might help. Perhaps helps you dig into that. Maybe it's a trauma thing or something like that. You don't really know. Maybe you're just afraid of stuff. And then that leads into the next one, like study your emotions. Where in the world do your emotions get projected? Where are you projecting fear? And I bet you've never asked yourself, what am I afraid of? Like, you know what you're afraid of, but you never sat down and written it out. And then ask yourself, well, what's my strategy to start confronting these things? And what am I angry about? What am I resentful about? What am I panicky about? What type of things do I do, and what type of emotion do they bring up out of me? And I guess this is sort of shadow work. And then there's a Boyo bonus at the end. Eat healthy, lift weights, and learn to fight, to just activate that warrior instinct, just to get you just a little bit better at dealing with suffering. So your resentment and all that is not so toxic as it can be when someone is unhealthy. You want to get your physiology clean, so that the stuff you actually are dealing with is strictly your psyche and your trauma and all that stuff the best you can, as opposed to, imagine you have a terrible diet and then you're wondering, it's like, am I possessed by some demon or something like that? And it turns out that you're like allergic to gluten, and that's all you have to do is just drop that out. You wanted to make it some spiritual quest, but it was just like, stop eating gluten, bro. Like, so that's what I consider a very big foundation. That's what I think you should take out of this the best you can. And I wish you all the best of luck. Jimothy, any last thoughts?
No, I think that's absolutely spot on. There's nothing wrong at all with reading Carl Jung books. I really enjoy reading Carl Jung books. I read him and I flick through I thumb the pages again, and he rustles my jimmies, and it's really enjoyable. But at the same time, if you only do that, there's a big problem, because the people who you'll spontaneously admire are not, I can guarantee it, they are not people who sit there thumbing the pages. They're people who get out there and they get after life, and they make themselves a stronger, better person, who use Jung. If you're going to read him because you're interested intellectually, do it. But if he says to do something, or if he's even hinting to do something, try it out. Because that's what life's all about at the end of the day. And it's only through experience are you going to make yourself stronger and better. And I've realized that over the course of my life. I'm only small. I'm only a young boyo. But since actually going out and having life experience and being more courageous with things, it's made me feel better. And it's given me a greater appreciation for the works that I am reading. And I know that a lot of our audience, I guess, is quite intellectual and heady and philosophical, and they like those ideas. But don't neglect the experiential part of things. It'll make you feel enriched and happy, and you'll go to sleep very happy. Then you'll have nice dreams.
There you go. Your dreams will get better. Well, see, and this is the final, I guess you could say, the shadow work of anybody who gets into Jung and all this stuff. And this is, of course, like, I am quite the dreamer. I'm sure you have noticed. The biggest shadow for the dreamer is reality. The biggest shadow for the cynic is belief, is dreams. And so when you're in this world, when you're dreaming and all that, the real question, like as much as you want to dive into your dreams, maybe you got to think about the real question is, my biggest problem throughout my whole life has been making my dreams come true. Because that's what everybody wants fundamentally when you think about it. They warn you, say, careful what you wish for, but at the same time, it would be quite the thing to discover that what you believed, what you visualized, what you hoped for could actually manifest in the world. And so maybe you should ask yourself when you're getting into the world of dreams, the land of dreams, the just entertaining this side of you that fantasizes. You could say to yourself, well, how do I make it happen? And maybe that's the ultimate test. Maybe I could try put this stuff to test and see, can I make it happen? Because when I started doing this, and again, my next podcast will talk about it a lot more, I realized just how, like, I started to procedurally do this stuff, and it started to show me the incredible prevalence of dreams in our lives personally. But then after I sort of got over that, I guess I got over like one hump, and I could then start to glimpse into the kind of culture, the collective, if you will. And I saw that big dreams run that as well. Like it's in a weird level, it's all like just this big mishmash of dreams.
Yeah.
And people, like, if you want to talk about politics to me looks like this big war of dreams, and people are trying to bully their dream into reality, and the dreams are conflicting, causing people to conflict up against each other. But it's almost like you have to find that in yourself before you can really start to feel that in the world, and start to understand that, start to play with that stuff in the world and know what's going on. And there's me like saying, oh yeah, well, I figured it out. Like, no, I haven't, but you get what I'm saying and all that. And so that's my thoughts. And I think Jimothy, he needs to do a bit of rustling of his jimmies, so he's getting a bit impatient. So we're going to have to wrap it up here. But
I've got a comment on that. It was just very immature.
Dude, like the last hour and a half, the last 2 hours has been nothing but like bad jokes and talking about dreams. So I don't know.
I really enjoyed it though. I really enjoyed it.
It was good. It was good. So we hope you enjoyed that, and by all means, like, subscribe, all that stuff. But if you wish to do a consultation with us, I'm going to drop a link down in the description, and I'll say even go for the comments as well, and you can have a chat with us about all this stuff and see what you think. Jimothy, any last words? No? Hello?
No.
Killing me there, bro. Killing me. All right, people. All right. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.